Halloween a night of candy, costumes, and spooky fun. But beneath the surface lies a dark and twisted history, filled with ancient rituals, blood sacrifices, and a night when the dead were said to walk among the living. Are you ready to uncover the chilling origins of Halloween? This is a story that begins over 2,000 years ago, in the misty forests of ancient Ireland, where the Celts celebrated a festival called Celtic. It was a time when the veil between the living and the dead was at its thinnest, and the spirits of the other world could cross over into ours. But not all of these spirits were friendly. Some were vengeful, seeking to harm the living or cause chaos. So, how did this ancient festival evolve into the Halloween we know today? Let's dive in. Halloween began over 2,000 years ago with the Celtic festival of Samhain, celebrated on October 31st. Samhain marked the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter, time when the veil between the living and the dead was believed to be at its thinnest. The Celts believed that on this night, the spirits of the dead could return to the world of the living. But not all of these spirits were benevolent. Some were malevolent, seeking to cause harm or chaos. To protect themselves, the Celts lit massive bonfires, hoping the flames would ward off evil spirits. They also left food and offerings outside their homes to appease the dead, a tradition that would later evolve into modern-day. But Samhain wasn't just about fear. It was also a time of celebration. The Celts would gather around the bonfires, wearing costumes made of animal skins and heads, and tell stories of the dead. These costumes were meant to confuse the spirits, making it harder for them to recognize the living. Over time, these traditions would merge with Christian practices, creating the Halloween we know today. But what happened when the living and the dead crossed paths? The Celts believed that on this night, spirits could return to the world of the living, and not all of them were friendly. Some were vengeful, seeking to harm the living or cause chaos. Others were lost souls, wandering the earth in search of peace. To protect themselves, the Celts developed rituals and traditions that would later become the foundation of Halloween. But as time went on, these traditions began to change, blending with new beliefs and practices. So, how did Samhain evolve into the Halloween we know today? Let's explore the next chapter in this dark and fascinating history. To protect themselves from malevolent spirits, the Celts lit massive bonfires, hoping the flames would ward off evil. These bonfires were more than just a source of light and warmth. They were a symbol of purification and protection. The Celts believed that the fires could cleanse the land and keep the spirits at bay. But the bonfires weren't the only way they sought to appease the dead. The Celts also left food and offerings outside their homes, hoping to satisfy the spirits and prevent them from causing harm. This tradition, known as Samhain, would later evolve into modern-day court-treating. In medieval Europe, poor people would go from door to door, offering prayers for the dead in exchange for food. Over time, this practice became more playful, with children dressing up in costumes and asking for treats. But the darker origins of this tradition are still felt today, as we carve pumpkins and light candles to guide the spirits on their way. When Christianity spread across Europe, the Church sought to replace pagan festivals with Christian holidays. Samhain was merged with All Saints' Day, celebrated on November 1st, creating All Hallows' Eve the night before the Holy Day. But many of the old pagan traditions persisted, including dressing as spirits to confuse the dead. This practice eventually evolved into the costumes we wear today. The Church also introduced new traditions, like lighting candles to honor the saints and praying for the souls of the dead. Over time, these Christian practices blended with the older pagan rituals, creating a unique mix of traditions that would eventually become Halloween. But not all of these traditions were so harmless. Some were downright terrifying. For example, in medieval Europe, people believed that mirrors could trap souls, and if you looked into one on Halloween night, you might see the face of your future ghost. One of the most iconic aspects of Halloween is the tradition of wearing costumes. But did you know this practice dates back to the ancient Celts? During Samhain, the Celts would dress in animal skins and heads, not just to confuse the spirits, but also to honor their gods and ancestors. These costumes were often grotesque, designed to scare away any malevolent entities that might cross over from the other world. As Christianity spread, the tradition evolved. In medieval Europe, people began dressing as saints, angels, and demons during All Hallows' Eve processions. By the 19th century, costumes became more playful, with people dressing as ghosts, witches, and other spooky figures. Today, Halloween costumes range from the terrifying to the whimsical, but their roots and ancient rituals remain. Interestingly, the tradition of guising wearing costumes and going door to door for treats was brought to America by Irish and Scottish immigrants in the 19th century, where it eventually became the trick-or-treating we know today. One of the most enduring Halloween traditions is the jack-o'-lantern. But did you know it comes from an Irish myth about a man named Stingy Jack? According to legend, Jack was a cunning trickster who managed to outsmart the devil not once, but twice. When Jack died, he was denied entry into both heaven and hell. The devil, still angry at being tricked, gave Jack a burning coal to light his way as he wandered the earth for eternity. Jack placed the coal inside a hollowed-out turnip, creating the first jack-o'-lantern. When Irish immigrants came to America, they discovered that pumpkins were easier to carve than turnips, and the tradition evolved. Today, the jack-o'-lantern is a symbol of Halloween, but its origins are much darker. Some say that if you see a flickering light in the distance on Halloween night, it might be Stingy Jack, still wandering the earth with his lantern. In the 19th century, Halloween became a time for divination and superstition, especially among young women. One popular tradition was mirror gazing, where a woman would stare into a mirror by candlelight, hoping to catch a glimpse of her future husband. If she saw a skull instead, it was said to be an omen of death. Another tradition involved peeling an apple in one long strip and tossing it over the shoulder. The shape it formed was believed to reveal the initials of a future lover. These rituals were often performed in groups, with friends gathering to tell ghost stories and play games. But not all Victorian Halloween traditions were so lighthearted. Some were downright terrifying, like the belief that if you walked backward up a staircase at midnight while holding a mirror, you might see the face of a witch or even the devil himself. Trick-or-treating as we know it today began in the early 20th century in America, but its roots go back to medieval Europe, where poor people would go salling, asking for food in exchange for prayers for the dead. In Ireland and Scotland, children would go guising, dressing in costumes and performing songs or jokes in exchange for treats. When Irish and Scottish immigrants brought these traditions to America, they merged with local customs to create trick-or-treating. By the 1920s, the practice had become widespread, with children dressing as ghosts, witches, and other spooky figures. But it wasn't until the 1950s, with the rise of suburban neighborhoods and mass-produced candy, that trick-or-treating became the Halloween staple we know today. Interestingly, the phrase trick-or-treat itself comes from the idea that children would play pranks if they weren't given treats, a tradition that dates back to the medieval practice of mumming, where people would perform in exchange for food or money. Haunted houses and urban legends have become a staple of modern Halloween. Stories like Bloody Mary and the Hookman have terrified generations, proving that our fascination with the supernatural is as strong as ever. The legend of Bloody Mary, for example, dates back to the 16th century and is said to summon a vengeful spirit when her name is chanted in front of a mirror. The Hookman, on the other hand, is a more recent urban legend. Originating in the 1950s, it tells the story of a killer with a hook for a hand who preys on couples parked in secluded areas. These stories are often shared around campfires or at sleepovers, adding to the spooky atmosphere of Halloween. But why do we love to scare ourselves? Some say it's a way to confront our fears in a safe environment, while others believe it taps into our primal instincts. Whatever the reason, haunted houses and urban legends are here to stay, keeping the spirit of Halloween alive